And welcome to episode 56 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. On this edition of the podcast, we're going to review Crisis on Infinite Earths, the massive crossover that the CW pulled off. 5 parts worth that span from December through January of this year. We'll talk about the Arrow finale and what is next for the CW. So let's open up a cold one and get started on episode 56 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Spoiler alert, I will reveal everything that's going on in all episodes in this episode when it comes to Crisis on Infinite Earths, CW, etc. So the hype, the build-up, yes, it was going on for months, but technically it was going on for about 3 years, was the build-up to this massive crossover, the Crisis on Infinite Earth. The groundwork had been set for a long time for this to happen, and I'm going to break down for you just some of the pros and cons of what happened with this crossover. And just to review it real quick, the basic gist of the crossover is based on the comics, but it was executed in a very different manner, which I was okay with. I'm not the kind of person who gets bent out of shape over comic accuracy in terms of the CW shows, just because of the fact that the CW is not trying to be 100% comic book accurate. What they're trying to do is they're trying to create a television universe that works for good storytelling and for the goal of having shows that people want to watch. So I don't get bent out of shape over the CW not being 100% comic book accurate. And let's be frank, the comic Crisis on Infinite Earths was a little bit haphazard and was a little bit anticlimactic in some ways. So I'm glad they didn't fully follow the comic. But basically what happens is that the Anti-Monitor with the antimatter wave is wiping out all of the multiverse because he wants to create an entirely new universe that is based on the antimatter that he can create. You find out during the Crisis on Infinite Earths that basically this guy is unstoppable. This guy's powers are beyond anything anybody expected, that he was indirectly the byproduct of the Monitor's overzealous desire to investigate the multiverse and investigate, the dawn of time when Mar-Novu decided to go back in time, as you find out in the later parts of Crisis on Infinite Earths. You also find out during the 5-part crossover that when Oliver has been saying for years, I have become something else, he literally does become something else. He becomes a very famous or infamous character, depending on your DC fandom. He becomes the Spectre. He basically becomes a more powerful being than anyone ever expected, and he is the catalyst to not just saving all of his friends, not just saving the universe, but actually creating an entirely new multiverse. And what is birthed out of that is Earth Prime, which all the shows, Arrow, DC Legends of Tomorrow, Supergirl, Batwoman, and Black Lightning, are all on the same Earth now. So there's no jumping from Earth to Earth. They're all on the same planet. And that is because of Oliver Queen becoming the Spectre. So that's basically the gist of what happens. You find out the heroes are hopelessly outgunned and all that kind of stuff, and in the end, they find a way to win. The pros of the crossover was, I thought for all intents and purposes, it was actually well executed by the actors. I thought the actors themselves did an excellent job at making this work for all intents and purposes. I really enjoyed Brandon Roth's portrayal of the different version of Superman, the Kingdom Come version Superman. I enjoyed Lex Luthor's appearing again. John Cryer's done an incredible job with the Lex Luthor character. Could arguably be the best Lex Luthor we have ever seen, in my opinion. I think that John Cryer embodies everything that you ever wanted Lex Luthor to be, whether you're a diehard comic book fan or a casual comic book fan. He is everything Lex Luthor is supposed to be. I thought Stephen Amell does an incredible job at putting a bow on his character. We'll get into more about the Arrow finale a little bit later. I enjoyed LaMonica Garrett's portrayal of Mar-Novu, the Monitor, and the Anti-Monitor. He actually had to play both characters. And I enjoyed it because of the fact that I think he's one of those actors who doesn't get a lot of credit for the roles he plays in, but he owns them. He does a great job with them. And I thought he did a great job with this crossover as well. I think the visual effects were better than I anticipated. I like the fact that we're at a point now technologically that we can actually have a certain level of special effect and it works. It's not overdone. It's not underdone. It's just right. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. I think also one of the things with Crisis on Infinite Earths is they really tied a bow with everything that came before this crossover, similar to what Marvel did with Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And I think that if that was the goal of the writers to have a similar crescendo and a similar ending of an arc that Marvel Cinematic Universe did with television shows, they absolutely did it. They took everything from the first season of Arrow, the first season of Flash, Supergirl, DC Legends of Tomorrow, and they put a nice little bow on it and presented it to the audience. So I thought that was a great job by them to do that. I also like the fact that they introduced a lot of different explanations for how far-reaching is the DC television universe. They showed that everything that's ever been on DC television is in the Arrowverse. And I like the fact that they also didn't deny that they were killing off half the universe. They were perfectly honest about what was going on from beginning to end. I like the cameos. I really enjoyed them. I thought it was really fun to have all the different cameos they did of different characters, of people who've written DC comics, people who have played different iterations of different characters. I thought it was very fun. And I think that's really what the goal was. The goal was to give the casual and diehard fans something fun. And no matter what happens with the CW shows moving forward, people can look back on the crossover and say they had fun with what they did with these 5 parts. Those are the pros. The cons, or the negatives I took away from it, were the following. Number 1, I understand why they made it 5 parts, but I think it was too long. And here's why. I don't think it was necessary for them to drag out over the entire holiday season and leave everybody hanging for parts 4 and 5. And let's be fair, the ratings bear that out a little bit. When they started with parts 1, 2, and 3, you're looking at 1.6 million viewers live and almost double that watching on DVR and so on. You saw that with the Arrow episodes of this, when they came back from the break, it dropped to 1.4 million and only half of that on DVR and on demand. So they actually lost some viewers from parts 1, 2, 3 to parts 4 and 5. And I think part of that is because the CW is still treating these shows like they're regular television shows, and they're not treating them like the episodic comic book nature that people are used to, which is, if anyone's ever read a comic, you know that every month the next part's going to come out, or every week the next part's going to come out. I think that they let people hang on way too long and wait way too long for some of these episodes to come back around. And I think that's really where the mistake is. I think that's really where you can't lose people along the way. If you're losing a few 100,000 people on live and another few 100,000 on DVR and on-demand playback, that tells me that you didn't do a good enough job with the cliffhanger you left us with after part 3. And I think that's where my second negative came into my review, and that is the Anti-Monitor was way OP. OP standing for overpowered. I get it. He's supposed to be, a near all-powerful being. He's supposed to be at a god-level hyper deity. But DC always has like a backdoor for every character. There's always a character, no matter how powerful they are, they can be beaten by something. Superman has kryptonite. The Flash can be neutralized by, the negative speed force or by other effects of science. There's all these characters with superpowers, but they all can be neutralized in some way. Well, the Anti-Monitor literally was only defeated because, one, Oliver Queen became the Spectre, and the Spectre had to stop him from creating the Antimatterverse. And then when the Anti-Monitor returned, they had to shrink him beyond the microverse, which they didn't really call the microverse. They kind of inferred it, and they joked how it was infringement. That was kind of funny. But they basically had to shrink him so he keeps shrinking for eternity, and he can never repurpose himself. That's a very haphazard way of eliminating a super powerful villain. I understand that you can't have a character more powerful than the Anti-Monitor show up and just defeat him, but to drag out this crisis to a point where you literally felt hopeless for about 3 episodes. You felt practically useless for you. You felt helpless for the superheroes. You felt like it was practically useless what they were fighting against and what they were fighting for. And frankly, as a viewer, you were kind of wondering, why is Superman not more powerful, right? Or why isn't the Flash faster to deal with certain things, but he's faster to deal with other things? It was inconsistent about who was actually powerful and who wasn't. The Monitor himself, Marnovu, has the power to turn Cisco back into Vibe temporarily, but he doesn't have the power to stop the Anti-Monitor from kidnapping Harbinger and turning her evil. It just seems a little ridiculous. And I think that's where the diehard comic book fan is going to turn around and say, well, it's comic books. But it's not good storytelling. It's not good television. As you've heard me here on the Mutant Blitz podcast, what makes great storytelling, what makes great character play out is if I remove said character, is the story still good? Will you still watch it? Will you still be interested in it? If the names of the characters are not the Arrow, the Flash, Supergirl, Batwoman, the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, do you still care about this story? And the answer is, you might not. And that's really where the CW, I think, messed up. And I think it's bared itself out in terms of the television viewership. For example, in the episodes since the crossover shows, specifically focusing on the 3 of the main catalysts of the show, being Batwoman, Supergirl, Arrow, and The Flash. Those are the 4 shows that had the most to do with the crossover. DC Legends of Tomorrow doesn't count because they started their season at the end of the crossover, which I thought was actually a good idea by the CW, because you don't want time travelers to get mixed up in the fiasco of a world multiversal altering event that could have just been stopped by time travel. You remove the mulligan, you remove the MacGuffin from the scenario, you remove the one thing that could undo everything to let the story play out. That was a good job by the CW. Now, here's the problem with the crossovers. As I mentioned, the crossovers average between 1.6 and 1.8 million live viewers, and almost double that on-demand and DVR viewer. But on the back end of the crossover, they didn't get the desired result for viewership beyond. So, Supergirl's Crisis on Infinite Earths episode was 1.66 million live viewers. But it was cut in half for her 2 episodes since. That is a 63% drop from episode 9 to episode 10. So the viewership was cut in half. So she didn't gain viewers. She actually lost some viewers. In fact, Supergirl was averaging roughly between 8 and 900,000 live viewers per episode. Now she's closer to 800,000. And if you look at the episodes leading into the crisis and since the crisis, she didn't really gain any viewers. She lost a little bit of viewership. Batwoman, a similar situation. That was at 1.7 million viewers. Again, almost double that in terms of DVR and on-demand viewers. You have a drop-off of 66%. You lost 1 million viewers from the crossover episode to the post-crisis episode. And from episode 10 to 11, Batwoman is dropped by 25% viewership. So what does that tell you? That tells you that people are not as invested in Batwoman since the Crisis crossover. Also, let's look at the Arrow. It's the final season of Arrow. This is the end. This is we're putting a bow on this. We're sending it off into the sunset. Thank you for the memories, right? 1.4 million for the Crisis event episode. The highest number of the season for the Arrow. The very next episode post-Crisis, you lost 600,000 viewers. The final episode of the Arrow, season 8, episode 10, you lost another 100,000 viewers. So the CW was using these crossovers to build audiences, to expand audiences, to stretch audiences, to get them more involved, to get them more invested in the characters of the other shows. And it didn't work. Specifically for two shows that have had inconsistent numbers. Now, there are two shows that were okay after Crisis. Black Lightning actually has seen an uptick in viewership since Crisis. So the Crisis on Infinite Earths actually did help Black Lightning. Black Lightning, before his inclusion on Crisis on Infinite Earths, was averaging between 5 and 700 million viewers per episode. Since then, the 4 episodes since, he's actually averaging between 6 and 700. So he actually gained roughly about 18% when you break it down, 18% viewership. The Flash, which is the #1 rated and viewed show on the CW since the Crisis crossover, he's pretty much stayed the same. He didn't really lose viewers. He didn't really gain viewers. He stayed about the same. Now, part of that has to do with the fact that you went from December 10th to February 4th before having another episode of The Flash. So any momentum you would have built up by the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, you lost that momentum, which is, again, another problem that CW has, is that they don't maintain momentum. They lose it more often than not. The Crisis on Infinite Earth episode of The Flash was around 1.73 million viewers live, and almost double that again on demand and DVR. The most recent episode of The Flash, season 6, episode 10, you're talking about a 25% drop off from the peak of the season, which was the Crisis crossover, and it is also a drop off of about 100,000 viewers from what they usually have on all platforms. So it's not a huge loss to The Flash, but it's pretty much business as usual. And as I said, the CW's #1 show in terms of viewership is The Flash by a good 100,000+. Now, when you break down the CW's most watched shows, again, it is still, for the top 5 shows are the shows that are involving superheroes. The Flash, Batwoman, Supergirl, DC Legends of Tomorrow. Those are 4 of the top 5. Arrow was a close 6. I think that these numbers, if you include the DVR and the on-demand playbacks to Arrow's numbers, they're actually much higher than just the regular millions of viewership. So if you include the non-live viewers, the Arrow is actually top 4. But if it's just in live viewership, there's 6 overall. And Black Lightning, like I said, they gained viewers from the crossover. So even though they're currently outside the top 10 in viewership on the CW, they're actually trending upward thanks to the Crisis. So actually one show did benefit from the Crisis, but the other shows did not. Specifically Supergirl, which is a show that's been losing viewers, and Batwoman, which is a show that has a brand new slate, a brand new time slot, and realistically is just been fighting to, grab a consistent foothold. The show has done fine in terms of viewership, but is not growing. Like, You open with 1.8 million viewers live, and now you're down to 700,000. That's a huge drop off. Now, the on-demand and streaming people and the DVR people are still there, but they're losing live viewers left and right, is Batwoman. So that's definitely a big hit, and you thought they would be helped by the crossover. But that's the biggest con of everything. I think that the crossover did not do a good enough job at setting the groundwork for the superheroes that are moving on from Crisis. I think they tried to by establishing that Supergirl, Batwoman, the Flash, they call them paragons. They consider them pillars, heroes of the multiverse. And I think that was their way of trying to set the stage for the shows moving forward. And I don't think it worked in terms of the way they had hoped it would. As I said, DC Legends of Tomorrow, you can't really include their numbers right now because of the fact that their first episode was on the back end of Crisis. So to sit there and say that they're highly rated and highly viewed right now is a skewing of the numbers, because they're 3 episodes in, and from Crisis to the 3rd episode since, yeah, they've dropped about 20%, but they're actually out doing what they did this time last year. So DC Legends of Tomorrow did receive a boost. Black Lightning did receive a boost. The other shows did not. And I think that's where the storyline failed, because it didn't establish the future very well. It kept a lot of things under wraps. And I understand you don't want to give too much away because you're building to a crescendo. You're building to the big moment. But they could have done a better job at establishing the future for the superheroes that are coming after Crisis, who are going to survive Crisis. And I thought that, again, you have this huge gap from part 3 to part 4 and 5. You lose the momentum. You're building all fall long into the winter. And then you have not 1, not 2, not 3, almost 6 weeks in between episodes. The Flash went almost 2 months between episodes. How are you supposed to maintain viewer momentum if you're leaving them out in the cold for that long? It's just a bad strategy. I don't understand why the CW continues to want to shoot themselves in the foot this way. But I don't know what really the future is for a lot of these CW shows. I understand that a lot of them have been renewed. The Flash, Batwoman, Supergirl, DC Legends of Tomorrow, and Black Lightning. They've all been renewed. They're all coming back for another season in the fall of 2020. And we know that we have Superman and Lois, the spin-off of Supergirl, coming as well. But where do you go from here? You build to this massive crescendo, this massive, huge crossover, and yet you can't parlay the huge numbers you had in viewership to all the shows. You keep one show steady, consistent. You boost one show moderately, and the other show doesn't really count because they weren't part of the buildup. They were part of the back end. Meanwhile, Supergirl and Batwoman, the 2 shows that arguably most needed the crossover to catapult them moving forward, didn't get the huge boost that you wanted to. And it's a shame, because I think Supergirl has actually had much better writing and structure for this season than they had the previous seasons. I think that Batwoman could be a lot better, but the fact that the big reveal of Kevin Conroy as Batman in the multiverse, as basically a psycho and an evil anti-hero, really was a letdown. And I think that hurt Batwoman's perception as well, because now she goes back to her Earth, which is now Earth Prime, and who knows who Batman is? Who knows if he'll ever show up? It kind of lost a little flair, and I don't know if they really gave the character a lot of room to showcase herself, because she's the least powerful character among a group of heroes who are ridiculously powerful. So that wasn't a good move either. For shows like Black Lightning, The Flash, and DC Legends of Tomorrow, I'm very intrigued to see, can they maintain the viewership that they have for the rest of the spring? I'm very curious because of the fluctuations in the schedule and to see how that happens. But overall, I don't think the CW got what they wanted out of this crossover. I think it was It was fun. It was interesting. I think they did a great job building up to it, but I think the execution was too drawn out. I don't think that the story was as well played out as it could have been. The actors did an incredible job with it. They all played their roles to the T. Everything you wanted from the cameos, the characters, the subplots, all that was great. But I think the writers and directors didn't give the audience everything they could have to put the rest of the CW Arrowverse moving forward in the best place to be successful. And I think that in and of itself is frustrating. Second topic here on episode 56 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I want to talk about the season finale, the series finale of Arrow and where it goes from here. So for those who may have only read about it or seen a little bit about it, you know, Arrow basically finished up in the post-crisis universe with 2 episodes. One being a backdoor pilot for what the CW would like to do starting next year, which is a show, or at least they're calling it right now, Arrow and the Black Canaries, which would be Mia Queen, played by Catherine McNamara, being the daughter of Oliver Queen in the future. I believe it would be set in 2040, but with so much time travel, who knows if they'll play around with that actually or not, because I know that John Diggle made an appearance in The Flash next episode, so who knows if they're going to stay in the future or not. And then the Black Canaries being Katie Cassidy's former Black Siren. She is now the Black Canary. And then, of course, Dinah Drake, who is another Black Canary from the Arrow show. At the very final 2 episodes, they set up a world where the Arrow is still needed. The Arrow is still relevant. They tie up all the loose ends. They explain that basically Oliver brought everyone back to life. He brought everyone home. He brought the whole Lance family back together. He brought his mother back to life. He brought the missing child of John Diggle and Lila Michaels' marriage back to life. He basically tried to make the universe whole, which was a great sentiment. It was a very feel-good moment. It was very nice. You know, he brings the Al Ghouls back together. He brings the whole universe back to what he would have liked it to be by sacrificing himself. And you get to have some finality. You get to have some closure at the end. You see what happens when Felicity joins the Monitor in the future. She gets to see Oliver, and I guess which is their version of heaven. Again, you have to remember that DC Comics is not based on a Judeo-Christian view of the universe. So their version of heaven is subjective. Is it really heaven? Is it a fantasy world? Is it alternate reality? We don't know. They don't really have specifically heaven and hell in terms of Judeo-Christian perspective. So your idea of heaven and hell is not going to be played out in the DC universe, whether it's in television or the movies or in comics. So Felicity and Oliver are in their version of heaven, which is Oliver's office at Queen Consolidated, and everything's happily ever after. I think the Arrow did their best. The writers and directors, they did their best in trying to bring 2 purposes to life, which is one purpose is make Crisis on Infinite Earths as relevant as possible, because Oliver was going to be a major centerpiece of what happens in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Secondly, they were doing their best to try to tie up any loose ends that were not already touched on in season 7. So you had 10 episodes to one, build up to a major event, and then at least in 2 episodes, show what the world is like after that major event. I think that for the most part, if you're a diehard Arrow fan, you got what you were asking for. You got all the cameos. You got all the people coming back to life. You got all the moments. You know, Roy and Thea are going to get married. Quentin Lance is back. Tommy Merlin, he's back. Emiko meets the rest of the Queen family. The Al Ghouls kind of make up the best that they can, even though they're a bunch of, killers and murderers. So it's really hard to get along too much in that situation. You get all the appearances you would want. I think they did fine. I think they did a good job. My only complaint is you give us this tease at the end of the show where John Diggle, it's inferred that he has discovered a Green Lantern ring. And you infer that he is going to be a Green Lantern. And then the next Flash episode, nada. I was not a fan of how they handled that. It was a nice fan moment, but then the very next time you see John Diggle on the screen, he's not a Green Lantern. He doesn't talk about the crash. He talks about nothing. It's just, oh, this happened at the end of Arrow, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the Arrow universe. That was not a good job by everybody involved. I didn't like that. I did like the fact that they brought everyone back to life. It was a nice way for the characters to understand a little bit more about Arrow's ultimate sacrifice, about Oliver Queen's ultimate sacrifice for everyone he loved and cared about. I liked that, and I enjoyed that aspect. I did like the fact that they had the heroes have to go save William, get him from a character that had something to do with an earlier episode and a flashback for the Arrow. I did like the fact that they brought some full circle elements to the final episodes. I like the fact that in the backdoor, they make you question, what is that tattoo? Why do they have the tattoo? Who is this woman who's sending the Deathstroke gang to Star City? Why do they kidnap William? All these little questions that go into the final 2 episodes. It's a very nice setup for what they want to do in the future. I thoroughly enjoyed Catherine McNamara's portrayal of Mia Smoke / Mia Queen because of the fact that I think that she has embraced what it means to be everything that is Oliver and everything that is Felicity on the screen. Mia is truly Oliver and Felicity's kid, and I think that was very well executed by her. I like the fact that they are keeping Dinah Drake and Laurel Lance involved in the show if they do it moving forward. I love the fact that they are being completely experimental with changing reality. You have a world-altering event. Some things have to change. Some things have to go sideways. It's never going to be perfect. And I think that Berlanti and Guggenheim and Beth Schwartz, they all did a very good job at playing around with those elements while not straying away from the essence of the story and the characters. If they give us this show, this Arrow and the Canaries, or whatever they want to call it, moving forward with Catherine McNamara and Katie Cassidy and Juliana Harkavy, I hope that they do it, because I think that those characters can do something that Supergirl and Batwoman frankly cannot and don't know how to do, which is give us strong female heroes that are real, that are believable, that are tangible, that have not made up problems, not problems that are sometimes a byproduct of their own situation. No. These women have real world problems. These women are dealing with real world issues. These women are having to, frankly, deal with realities that Supergirl and Batwoman could never understand because of, one, how their characters have been developed, and two, because Supergirl is ridiculously powerful, and let's be realistic, character of Batwoman, and Ruby Rose, I think, is doing a solid job of the character. I'm not saying that the character is a home run. I think the character actually be better written, and I think that's the problem. Catherine Kane's character is a little bit too dark and a little bit too numb and a little bit too desensitized to reality to genuinely handle certain problems effectively. And I don't think that she is the best role model for handling those problems. And I think her character could be much better written and much better executed by the writers and directors and producers. Ruby Rose is doing her best with the character handed to her. This is where Arrow and the Black Canaries can do a better job. Supergirl was a show created for women and about women superheroes. Now you can actually do that a better job with Mia Queen and Dinah Drake and Laura Lance. Katie Cassidy, for the last 8 years, has done an incredible job on screen playing a strong, confident woman who has real world problems, whether she's been a hero or a villain, the different iterations of her character. Catherine McNamara in just 2 years has proven that she is one of the best rising young stars in all of television and media. And I think that her ability to be aggressive, her ability to be empathetic, her ability to express the range of emotions is real and believable. And I think that a lot of women are going to be able to identify with that. And we see it online, on Twitter, on message boards, in chat rooms, people listening to interviews with her. People identify with her in a way that they really haven't with Melissa or with Ruby. You know, Ruby playing Batwoman and Melissa Benoist playing Supergirl. The story writing is much more believable. It is much more realistic. It's because they don't have superpowers to solve all their problems. They're not dealing with the same issues that the other two superheroes are dealing with, issues that don't really affect the entire population. Listen, you know, whether you are someone who is standing up for, you know, lesbian and gay rights or not, whatever your position is on that topic, let's be realistic. Demographics show that the issues that are being dealt with on Batwoman only affect a small portion of the population. It is not a general population issue. It is a certain group of people issue. Whereas the problems that are being dealt with on Arrow and the Black Canaries, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to public perception, when it comes to attitudes about them, are much more universal. I understand that there is a place in media for all types of presentations of women, and I'm totally for that. But I think that, again, Batwoman and Supergirl, they present scenarios that are not universal problems. They are select problems. They are hyper-specific problems. Not even specific, they're hyper-specific to a specific group of people, to a specific issue, to a specific topic. I think one of the things that is important when it comes to understanding comic books is that comic books are there as an escape. Fiction is there as a version of escape. It's a version of empowerment to show that someone else is feeling the same things that you do, going through the same things you do. It's a level of empathy. It's a level of connection. And if you're an audience and you just saw Batwoman on crossover, the numbers tell you that they didn't buy it. They didn't buy this version of Batwoman. And it's not Ruby Rose's fault. It's the writing. It's the production. It's the directing. It's the emphasis on things at the end of the day don't matter to a general audience. It only applies to a specific section of that audience. Now, if you're okay with that, then that's fine. But if your goal is to make as much money, get as many viewers as possible, if The Flash can do that and Batwoman can't, that's a problem. I have said numerous times that Supergirl has deviated very far from the original intent. And while they've slowly tried to get back to the original intent, for as great as Melissa does with the character of Supergirl, and I think that she has done an incredible job from day one to now. I think her character could be written better. The stories could be written better. I think that they have let her down a little bit. They have not given her all the tools possible to be as successful as she could be. Whereas the writers and directors and developers of Arrow have done a much better job at empowering and enabling their female heroes to be characters that, as we see in viewership numbers, as we see on reaction online, that people are drawn to. You know, Katie Cassidy has done an incredible job over the years with her character. And like I said, Catherine McNamara, she's only going to get better. She's already been great. Imagine how much better she can be with another full season under her belt playing this character. So I am personally rooting for this show to happen. As of right now, the first week of February, there has not been anything officially confirmed for that show, but all signs are pointing toward we will have that spinoff show. And I hope we do get it, because when it was first reported, I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. I wanted to see how the final season of Arrow played out. And now, after seeing the pilot episode, seeing how the characters have evolved and matured and grown. I'm looking forward to it. And like I said, I think it can do what Supergirl and Batwoman could never do, because those two shows are dealing with characters and topics and situations that are hyper focused. They're a niche. They are not universal. They are not for the majority of viewers, whereas Arrow can do that in a way that the other two shows can't. So I'm rooting for more Catherine McNamara as Mia. I'm rooting for more Katie Cassidy as Laurel. I'm rooting for more Dinah Drake. I'm rooting for these characters to keep playing and keep giving us more great stories. And I think that since the Arrow did get better in the last 2 seasons, thanks to the addition of Beth Schwartz, I think that the shows can do well, and I'm looking forward to that possibility. All right, thanks again for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Make sure you subscribe, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pocket Cast, YouTube, whatever platform you're catching me on, as I bring you all the reviews and analysis of the world of movies and comic book television. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Hennig for any feedback you want to give me. I always appreciate your thoughts and comments. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.